This is David Ross, and welcome once again to the Lion's Roar. This evening, I don't know if you're going to consider this more of a discussion about the business of martial arts, but I think it's kind of related to something else that I talk about, which is how we train with truth and how when you get away from truth, everything sort of unravels. Um, because when we talk about the martial arts industry, I was just having a discussion actually with my very good friend, Sifu Steve Ventura, and having known him basically my entire life, we talked about a far-ranging bunch of things. One of the things that we talked about was how, in one sense, the martial arts business industry in general, and I don't mean just kung fu schools, but the whole industry, professional industry of people that are running schools professionally, is similar in some ways to what happened with kung fu, Chinese martial arts, which is that it became part of the Zhenghe, that subculture, that underground subculture, meaning that you had certain legitimate martial arts people, but then they were also spending time with, criminals and con men and hucksters and gamblers, and some people would do performances because they were selling legitimate medicine, and some people were doing performances to sell, snake oil, we talked about, I talk about in my book, at great lengths about how, there was legitimate, golden bell training, but then there were people saying that, you could just invite a spirit into to possess your body here, write a spell on a piece of paper, burn the piece of paper, drink the water, and you'll get exactly the same effect as somebody that spent 3 years doing like a vigorous kind of Lingong, Qigong kind of practice. I spent years in this. I don't know how many people realize exactly, like, I came out of an old school Chinatown school and Chinatown community from the 80s and the 90s, when Chinatown was very different and when Chinese martial arts were very different. And, that has its own issues that we're talking about. And when we first started, quote unquote, going public, other training brothers of mine wanted to open commercial schools. And because they wanted to be successful, they wanted to make money. And there's nothing wrong with money. And I'm going to talk about the difference between wanting to make money, which is okay, and being greedy, which is not okay, in this process. And they brought in people that were consultants. And I've said this before in previous times. Numerous times, I sat and listened to these people, and I said, this is just a scam. And so I ran my school kind of, not commercially in that sense, not like a lot of the schools. For a very long time, I was very turned off by that experience. And then what happened was, as people know, I became involved in a franchise, which was a very successful franchise. And while I've moved away from that franchise, and I'm doing something different right now, let me be very clear. At the very beginning, I only joined the franchise. And, initially I was very skeptical and I was dancing around it from the outside. But I jumped right in when I saw that it was different. The problem was that it didn't stay different. So how is this all going to work into what I'm talking about? I'm obviously a big believer in truth. Pardon me. And truth is, what's that saying? To thine own self be true. I've said, like, if you want to run a school that's fitness oriented, that's fine. If you want to run a school that's just like, culture based, that's fine. You're running a fight gym, it's not a great business model. I've talked about that before. That's fine. But be honest about what you are. In other words, if you're running a sport karate school where you're doing tricking and parkour and, a musical kata and all this stuff, that's fine. Just don't think that you're doing like a hardcore, a combatives program. If you're running a kung fu program to preserve culture, that's fine. Just be aware of what you are. But the problem is that in the quest to make money, people try to be all things to all people. And so that right there is the first problem. And the way that this really started off initially was, I was talking about, I'm in the process of looking around to see about reopening full time. The pandemic in New York City forced everybody, if you obeyed the law And also, if you were smart, in my opinion, people closed. And depending upon how you read the law, you were closed around 10 months where you couldn't even be reopened. And so in New York City, with the commercial rent the way it was, that meant a lot of people went out of business, because if you stayed in your place, you would have accumulated 10 months of rent, which, New York rents are not at all cheap. They're far from it. And if you left, well, then you didn't have a space. And you need money to get started. And again, to get restarted, we're not even sure how to get restarted right now. But, and some gyms, they just flaunted the law and they stayed open, which invited potentially huge fines. But also, if you had a spreader event in your school, you would have gotten people sick, and you could have been sued. It certainly wouldn't engender good feelings among your students. And so now that we're talking about reopening and we're dealing with what's going on, and again, the Omicron thing just happened. I said that right now, and again, I've always followed the law, always, scrupulously. That's why I closed on March 16th, that date that they told all the gyms to close, and didn't, haven't reopened full time, and only went indoors when everybody went indoors, and I'm using a part-time space, but I'm also doing what everybody does now, which is requiring masks and requiring vaccinations. And there are gyms in New York that are going like, well, if you're vaccinated, you don't need a mask. It's not what the law says right now, by the way. They want to be all things to all people, because they realize that some people don't want to be vaccinated and some people don't want to wear masks. And so they're trying to be all things to all people. I'm not going to be that. You know what happens when you try to be all things to all people? It fails. When we're talking about the virus, right? If you have people coming in and they're not vaccinated, you're creating a huge potential liability. Just be flat about that. I mean, if you have insurance, and some people don't carry insurance, but that's another story. But if you have insurance and you're expecting your insurance to pay for it, and you let non-vaccinated people in, most insurance people are going to deny you. If you don't have insurance and you get sued, well, good luck with that. But let's say you don't even get sued. You're just going to engender bad feelings. You're going to make people sick. And then there's moral and ethical thing, and that's the other way that I operate, unfortunately. I say unfortunately in sarcasm. That's my sarcasm mode. But I don't want to get people sick. I don't want to get sick. I don't want to go home and make my family sick. I don't want to get anybody else sick. You're playing games. You're inviting trouble with the city. You're inviting trouble with the state. You're inviting lawsuits. You're inviting losing your insurance if you have insurance. You're inviting engendering, I'm having trouble with that word today, bad feelings among your students. You're going to lose students. You're going to get people sick. I just say people very simply, I want you fully vaccinated. Right now, the law says you have to be vaccinated, the first dose, but I want everybody fully vaccinated. I haven't really said about the booster yet, but when I reopen, it's probably going to be, you're going to need the booster also, and you're going to wear a mask. And I know some people don't want to do it, but I've made the decision that this is going to be the culture in my gym, and this is what we're going to do. And so what I want to do is from day one, make sure that either you fit the culture or you don't fit the culture. And that's the other problem. What's interesting is these people that do the martial arts business stuff, and they go to these very expensive masterminds, which I did and got a lot from them. Remember, I said that, a lot of my success is from going to the masterminds and from Bedros Keuilian saying, imperfect action is always better than, excuse me, I'm getting over being sick. Bedros Keuilian says that imperfect action is always better than imperfect. Imperfect action is always better than perfect inaction. And somebody pointed out to me, I didn't know this quote before, but something like, perfect is the enemy of good. Seeking perfection is the enemy of good. I'm not exactly sure the exact quote, but I'm sure if you Google it, you'll find it. I'm going to Google it later. But they go to these masterminds and they talk about, in one side of their mouth, be everything to everybody, and that never works too. And for example, if you want to be like hardcore fitness, that's great, but then you can't water things down, because first of all, if you bring in people that don't looking for hardcore, they're not going to survive the hardcore. And if you start to dumb down the hardcore, you're going to lose your hardcore students. Right? There's nothing wrong with hardcore. I pointed out the other thing that Bedros said years ago, which was quite accurate, is look at all the hardcore programs that work. CrossFit, paleo diets. You don't need to water stuff down. But if you're doing something that's like for, not geared toward people that really are serious about fitness but just want to do something fun and have sort of like a social interaction and are interested in like a foreign culture if you're a Kung Fu school, that's fine. But then you can't mix it with elements of CrossFit. Or if you're running a CrossFit gym and then suddenly you start doing like pizza night and like Burning Man night and all this stuff, you're going to lose people. Be true. But these people go to these groups and they also talk to them about their culture and their branding. But again, your culture and your branding has to be consistent, because otherwise it's not culture and branding. My culture is, quite honestly, and I'm going to put this up publicly and people are going to dislike me for it, and I don't care. My culture is going to be, I want people that are concerned about their community, that don't want to get other people sick and understand that. So they're going to wear masks and they're going to be vaccinated. And if you have problems with either one of those things, it's best that we start there from step one, the first time you walk in the door. Step one. It's better that way. And what happened is, and I can tell you this because I've been running classes now. I was in the park for a while, then I moved indoors. I'm in a part-time space right now. And I've been signing people up on programs. I mean, discounted programs, because I don't feel like I'm in a full-time space offering classes 6 to 7 times a week. I don't have my full equipment and everything on my full schedule. But I'm signing people up. And I found that, yes, I've attracted like-minded people. The biggest problems I had was, again, with the franchises losing that kind of focus on like-minded people. Because long before the franchise, when I co-ran a gym with Steve Ventura, not ironically, but like Steve Ventura and I ran gyms together. The one problem that we had was that when you start developing a fitness program on one side of the room and a contact program on the other, you run the danger of running two separate populations coexisting in the same space. So when I first started my own gym by myself, I very consciously tried to make the fitness program not really a fitness program, but a basic non-contact, beginner-friendly program that was related to and fed into the contact program, the program that I was using that was creating fighters. And at first I was very successful with that. And at first the franchise that I got involved with, and some of you know who I'm talking about, but we're not going to name them, I had that idea too. Then it became a little bit of, well, we need to sort of separate them, and we really want our focus there. And also, especially as it became a franchise and they were dealing with people that they were recruiting people the same way you would a Subway to just buy a franchise and be trained. They weren't career martial arts people. The contact program obviously wasn't going to work. And I kind of walked a fine line in that, and that was part of the reason that it fell apart. But it's not really the point of what I'm talking about today. I'm talking about being true. And so in one sense, like I said, one culture. So I don't lose my focus here, because I'm kind of ranting and raving tonight. Don't lose your focus. Figure out what you are. Be honest about what you are. Stick to your guns and let people know from the first time that they walk in. The other thing is that people are always afraid that they're going to get a bad review on the internet. If you haven't realized it's almost 2022, right? It's December 2021. I'm looking at the calendar just to pinch myself and wake myself up. It's December 2021. It's almost 2022. No matter what you do, no matter how much you bend over backwards like the Matrix to block bullets, somebody's going to write a bad review about you. No matter what you do, somebody's going to have an issue. We live with like crazy right wing and crazy left wing and wokeness, and you could make a joke, and if the person doesn't like the joke, it's the end of the world. Don't worry about it. You want raving fans, and your raving fans will outnumber the crazy people writing stupid reviews. And respond to them. That's the other thing. Until you don't respond to it, or apologize. Don't apologize. I'm going to try to put this up, so I'm going to stay away from the not safe from work language that I really want to say. But I sent you an email and I said be 15 minutes early. I sent you a follow-up email either the night before or the day of saying be 15 minutes early. I start the class and you show up 10 minutes after the class began. And I very politely said to you, I'm terribly sorry. We're not going to penalize you because you showed up. It's not like we're going to mark the class as used, but I'm going to have to reschedule you. If people want to complain about them, let them complain about that. Go on and answer them going, unfortunately, be polite about it and use carefully chosen words, but be direct. Unfortunately, as we explained to you when we booked your appointment, we required you to be 15 minutes before the class began. You arrived 25 minutes late, which unfortunately did not allow us to let you participate in the class. It's a safety issue, and we're concerned with everyone's safety. Also, we did not penalize you, so it is now simply a matter of you rescheduling. Thank you. Don't apologize for not letting them take the class. This is, again, the industry has taught us to be so wishy-washy that we don't stand up. I'm sure if you've done martial arts in the old days, if you did it before the 90s, you didn't think to talk back to your martial arts instructor. If you showed up late, you were doing push-ups. You were like definitely afraid of being a minute late. Now people just trounce in, walk in. And I know, and it's a challenge because there's an entire new generation of people that were raised differently. But stick to your guns. Don't worry about bad reviews. Tell people, I have a cancellation policy now because I'm in extraordinary circumstances with the pandemic, limited attendance in a class. People have to pre-register. They take a spot, and if they just don't show up, well, that was a spot somebody could have used. None of that. It's rude to just, you made an appointment and you just didn't show up. And again, I booked you, I confirmed with you, and then I confirmed with you either the night before or the day of the class. And in all of those conversations I said, if you do not attend and you do not cancel, we're going to mark you. And so if you don't show up, especially if it's your first class, and now, if you show up late, I do understand that trains can sometimes screw with us. I can't let you into class because you're 25 minutes late. Maybe you're more and you've completely missed the warm-up and it's not safe for you. Remember that the biggest injury I ever had in my life was when I missed a warm-up. So I'm not doing this to hurt you. I'm doing this to help you. I don't want you to get injured. But I'm not going to penalize you because I know that you tried to come to the class. You showed up. Now, you didn't show up. Maybe you got a flat tire. Maybe you got into a car accident. Maybe there was a flood in your house. Maybe you had to take your mother by the ambulance to the hospital. We all have this miraculous device now that I never had as a kid called a cell phone. You realize that the cell phone has more technology than the computers that sent the first people into space in our hand? Send an email. I said to somebody the other day, I said, even if you just send me an email, it's one word, emergency. I will go, okay, great, you had an emergency. Not great, I don't mean great that you have an emergency. Thank you for letting me know. And that's usually how I respond. Just thank you for letting us know. And I won't penalize you. And I say that. But if I never hear from you, and what happens is these people don't show up, and then a month later they'll contact you, and they'll act like they didn't have an appointment and didn't no-show on you. Stick to your guns. Be true. And if you start off letting people walk all over you, guess what's going to happen? They're going to continue to try to walk all over you. And you're going to get flustered, and you're going to get frustrated, and it's going to make your life miserable. Don't be miserable doing your job, whatever it is, but especially if you're doing a martial arts job. You're running a martial arts school. Don't be miserable. Stick to your guns. So, I'm talking about truth. The thing that was beautiful about that franchise when it first started, I was going to say when we first started it, and the reality is that even though I don't get credit for it, it really was we. I had the program, the kickboxing program. If you doubt that it's true, all you have to do is look at the first video that was put up for the franchise. I'll just leave it at that. I had the biggest school at the beginning. I was dealing with the most amount of intros. At one point, 100 intros a month. 100 intros a month. And people were like crazy. I used to work with Member Solutions International, MSI, and they had told me that I had the first time that they had done 114 contracts in a 30-day period. So what did that mean? Well, it meant that every night when I was done teaching classes and signing people up, I would get on the phone and we would talk about, well, what happened? And I would say, well, there was something in the ad that, created a problem. Let's change the wording. Pardon me. There's something on the web special, or the web special should definitely say you need an appointment, or the web special should say you need to be on time, or the web special should say you're going to get your gloves when you show up. And we would tinker with it. Well, the way we do the class cards, I think we should do it this way. And we would tinker with it. In other words, everything was what I would call science. We experimented with it to see if it worked, and we based our conclusions based upon what actually happened and what was perceivable, and we attempted to improve it over and over and over again. We had no dogma, no doctrine on what was correct and what was wrong. We experienced it to the point where it got to be a really, really effective system where we were signing up so many people. And we were getting to the point where we were really avoiding a lot of what they call objections and a lot of the challenges of signing people up. And we were avoiding problems where, like, you don't want to mess with people, and you don't want to, create bad reviews by your behavior. So the more things that you do in your advertising and in your web special and in your confirmations to properly frame them, the less you're going to have of those. You're not going to avoid them completely, like I said. There's going to be just nuts out there. I've experienced it. Trust me. I could write a book about it. And I like the fact that when that franchise first started, it was based upon, one, the science. Nothing that they offered people and told people to do wasn't backed up by actual experience. Some of the stuff the head of the franchise was doing in his own schools, and he would test it out. We tried a program at a certain number of classes and a program at a certain number of classes. We tried a program at 7 months and at 9 months and at 6 months. We tried, and they collected stats on what worked, and so it was science. It was not guessing. That was one thing. Second was the fact that they were very honest about all the nonsense that was in the industry. The most popular phrase, this is going to be not safe for work, was same shit, different box. Meaning that if you went to most of the people in the martial arts industry for any kind of like convention, summit, meeting, seminar stuff, it was just the same idea. Over and over and over again. They just were repackaging it. And mostly the idea was, you're not going to keep people. You have to try to delay them leaving so you can get the most amount of money out of them. So, like, if your door is over there, how many obstacles can you put between here where they join and there where they leave to keep them there? And everything that came, add Tai Chi to your program, add, Filipino stick fighting to your program, do a special winning attitude team, add a black belt club, was just the same shit in a different box. And when you went into meetings in this franchise, business-related meetings, as someone that was an instructor or someone that was running, it was very honest. This is what it was. There was a very famous book that was sold to people, How to Run Your School, and it was a big, huge, thick book. And someone in the franchise was there when the book was written and said, the person lifted up and said, it's not heavy enough. We need to add like 30 or 40 pages to make it seem heavy. Not 30 or 4 pages of essential information. You need to add something. And again, it was perceived value. And we talk about that kind of stuff all the time in business stuff. What's perceived value, what's real value. But it was clearly deceiving people that were paying, thinking that they were buying information that was essential for them to be successful. And the other thing that is a open secret in the martial arts industry is that many of the people that are telling you how to run successful schools did not run successful schools. If they have money, and remember, anybody can go out and rent a boat for the day and hire some models to stand on the boat with them. That's a true story. You can rent a luxury car and then, take a picture staying in front of the car and going, this is my car. You can rent for the weekend a beautiful house, again, have the yacht and the beautiful car and the beautiful house and the beautiful models and say, this is my beautiful life, and then go back to your tenement wherever it is. And there are so many people that make money selling you success that they never did for themselves. It's true. I'm not naming any names, and so then they can't sue me either, because they'd have to say, well, that was clearly me. But I'm telling you the truth. It's not true. And this is why ultimately it unravels. And the problem with the franchise was, at some point, it started off with truth, and that's why it was great, and it was working, and it was one of the most successful things that was ever done of all time. And it was like that Camelot moment, that shining moment. It was like the beginning of The Godfather or the beginning of Goodfellas, and everybody was just rolling in cash, and then by the end, everybody was like, packed in meat trucks up on meat hooks kind of stuff. It fell apart because it kind of veered back into that martial arts industry kind of stuff. And I'm not trying to, I've consulted people. Most of the time it's like talking to brick walls, because people in the martial arts don't listen. And I'm certainly not restarting a consulting business, and that's not the point of this. But my point is that, for the few people that do follow me and want my honest advice, be truthful. Start off establishing your culture in your school from day one. And don't veer from it. Don't try to be all things to all people. Be what you are. Be the best at what you can be. Because that's the other thing also. Is a lot of times things get watered down because you're trying to bring in people, and some people are really, really good at it, and some people are not so good at it. And you got to try to dumb it down to the most common denominator. And that never works. And people also try to copy something else because they think it was successful. Tabo came out and everybody tried to copy that. John Taffer, who is a brilliant businessman who you should watch his show and listen to him. It's amazing the stuff that I do recommend people watch as a martial arts instructor. Tabitha Salon saving salons, or salon rescue also. People go, what does hairdressing salons have to do with martial art? Well, you'd be surprised. Taffer is probably one of the biggest names in successful business and stuff. And he said that when people try to copy a successful product, and it happens all the time, doesn't just happen in martial arts, right? It's always less successful than the original product. So don't look at something and go, oh, somebody's doing cardio Tai Chi, I'm going to start doing cardio Tai Chi. Be who you are. Be the best at what you are. Be honest about it. Set up your culture. And engage in truth. In other words, an experiment. Experiment. You can prove me wrong, right? I would say that, class cards were good for a short period of time, and then they outlived their usefulness. I would say go on monthlies. I believe in contracts of a certain length with then auto renews that, people have to commit to you to a certain amount. Maybe you want to do month to month. Prove it. Statistically, if you can show me statistics, 90% of my people sign up on a month to month and they stay on average, 10 months. Great. How many of them stay on 10 months? 78% of them. That's great. If you go, I don't know, some people show up, they sign up or they don't. If you don't have stats, then, you live or die by your stats. But the truth thing is so important. I got on this because I was talking about the truth thing is so important. When you operate with truth, you're a success. And I also promised I would talk about the difference between making money and being greedy. Nothing wrong with making money. We all have to eat. We have children. We have wives and children and obligations. And some of us take care of our parents. And, some of us have family members that need help. And we all have to make money. When you have more than enough money than you need to be comfortable, and you start looking how to make more money, and the way that you decide to make that more money is going to, one, hurt other people, and two, undo what's been good in making you money and going to create problems, that's greed. And that's why, to contradict the famous line that, greed is good. No, greed is not good. Motivation is good. Organization is good. Passion is good. Greed is bad. Greed is the irrational need to try to find a way to make even more money than you can possibly have anything to do with, and doing it in such a way that is counterproductive in the final product. And I've experienced this firsthand several times in several different ventures. Be careful. It's out there, and it'll catch you too. I've had the other thing. I stayed very clear of it, but sometimes I was so uncomfortable with making money myself that, I didn't get the most out of what I could have gotten out of. So truth is always the best way to go. It really is. And I hope I gave you some ideas of how to go down this. And it'll also reflect in your martial arts practice, because if you don't feel the need to try to be everything to everyone, you can focus on being true and being the best that you can be. If you're doing a fitness program, make it the most awesome fitness program. If you're working on, preserving a very traditional format for cultural preservation, have a wonderful traditional Kung Fu school. If you want to be more modern, do that. If you want to be like the new practical Kung Fu approach, be that. If you try to be all things, none of it really succeeds. And that's why we're sort of where we are right now. Kung Fu is trying to be like a little of everything, and it's really none of anything. I hope you got something out of this. As always, thank you for listening to me. And as always, if you have a question, feel free to reach out to me. Thank you.